without much wait, I will hand over the mic to him. Please welcome Nipun Mehta.
So, dear friends, Amdi Sandeep told about Nipun. There are many more things that I want to tell about Nipun. When I met him, I felt that I'm meeting a Buddha. He's such a holy Buddha, but Buddha in action. Buddha who is not with his eyes closed and who is just meditating, but a Buddha in action. I found him that he's spirituality in action. So today we are really very honored to have him here. In his presence, we can really absorb his vibration, his message, and I warmly welcome you to this place. Thank you. I'd like to sit there and watch you and listen to every word that you speak.
Thank you. I think instead of 5 minutes of silence, we'll just go into the talk. I feel honored to be in the field of your love. And I mean that. And thank you, Dr. for sparking this incredible, whatever this is. when we first met, Dr. and I and Sandeep, and his wife as well, we were having a conversation at a coffee shop, and there was a guy who was not part of our conversation, and he, in between, gets up and feels moved to tell us that you guys are on the right track, in his own words. It was incredible. Usually you don't intrude in other conversations, but I just feel like, I think the flow that you have put forth from your own cultivation is beautiful, and I feel honored that I get to be a part of it. So thank you for holding me in this space. I have a bunch of slides, but I don't know if we'll get to it, or even if we want to. But maybe we'll see. In 2005, my wife and I went on a walking pilgrimage. We were running an organization. The organization was doing really well. But sometimes when the material world, there's a kind of success to it, it can be intoxicating. And so you don't know if you are genuinely serving or if you're caught up in your own cycle. So we decided to test and see if we're genuinely serving or not. So we decided to sell everything we had. And a few boxes we left at my parents' place in California. And then we came to the Gandhi Ashram. And we said we're going to walk south. We had a backpack. And we didn't have much else. 2 pairs of clothes. And we said we would eat whatever food is offered to us. And we would sleep wherever place is offered to us. And it was an incredible experience. So many amazing experiences when you put yourself out, when the ego is so on the edge of your consciousness. The universe responds. Sometimes it responds in ways that are difficult because you need to learn those difficult lessons and you need to learn to grow from it. And sometimes in such beautiful ways. And sometimes in mysterious ways. So I remember one time we were walking through a patch that had very little water. So people would have to walk 4 hours just to get one pot full of water. And so we're walking, and I'm getting nervous. My wife is also with me, but at that time my wife was 6 months. And I said, where are we going to get the water? We didn't know. And we're going, and all of a sudden in the distance we see a small hut. From the hut comes an old grandmother, and she looks at us, and before we can even ask, she's like, come here, as if calling her sons. And It says, "You must be thirsty. Do you want water?" We said, "Yes, we really want water." So we went there, and she gave us water. It's really good. And then she says, "You must be hungry." And I was like, we shouldn't get greedy. But we really were hungry. So I was like, yes, no, yes, yeah, I think so. And she brings out these bhajiyas. I don't know what the English equivalent is. In Gujarati we call it bhajiyas. You know, these fried things with potatoes and things. And I was like, great. And she's giving us all this love while the grandfather is sitting there and just praying. He's in the middle of some ceremony or ritual. And every so often, I could hear him say, "Om Namah Shivaya," or something, or some other chant or another. He was not tuning into us at all. So then, at some point, while we're eating, the grandfather looks to us and he says, "So what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we are on a walking pilgrimage. We're practicing renunciation, if we can let it all go. And we're trying to become good human beings. And along the way, if we can help other people, we're trying to do whatever small things we can do. Sometimes picking up trash, sometimes helping an old man lift his haystack, sometimes maybe just sharing a story, whatever it is, we don't know, but when we walk into each door and we say, how can I help? Instead of saying, what can I get? And so we're just trying to purify ourselves. And he says, okay, that's good. Where did you start from? So I said, well, we started from Ahmedabad. And he looks at me and he says, oh, Mehta. And I said, which is another city. And so he said, no, not Mehta, Ahmedabad. And I said, and he again says, yeah, that's what I said, Mehta. I said, no, Dada. I thought maybe he has a hearing problem, so this time I said it with a little louder volume. No, Dada. I meant Ahmedabad, Ahmedabad, 127 kilometers from here, Ahmedabad. He looks at me and he says, oh, so I see you're not on a pilgrimage after all. And I said, what do you mean? Of course we're on a pilgrimage. He says, you're counting. You're keeping track of how many kilometers it is from where you started to here. And I knew exactly how it was 127 kilometers. And even I was thinking to myself, how did I know it was 127? I should have said 130, 120, but I knew exactly. So even though on the face of it, I had left it, I had left a lot of things for material comforts, but in my mind, I was counting, I was keeping track. And so long as we're doing that, we're going to continue on this whole cycle. It doesn't mean that we're not to anything at all. So that spirit, for me, of how do we make sure that we're actually changing the patterns of our mind. There's actual inner transformation going on through what we're doing. Sometimes if we're just focused on the inside, we can get caught up in a loop. Sometimes if we're just focused on the outside, we can get caught up in a loop. But it is the fusion of the inside and outside that seems to hold the highest possibility. So that's sort of been my journey. Maybe I'll tell you about the 4 shifts and maybe we can do question and answer after that. Let's see. Oh yeah, so when people ask me, what has been your journey? I'll often say, well, in the first part of my journey, I practiced giving. In the second part of my journey, I practiced receiving. Because in truth, whenever you do any act of kindness, any small thing, we have to receive. This is the law of nature. You cannot give without receiving. Like it's like giving a hug and saying, I'm going to give you a hug. I cannot give you a hug without receiving a hug. That's just the nature of a hug. So we tend to, differentiate between the giving and the receiving, but really it's all together. And then the third stage is what I talked about with this pilgrimage, dada, which is dance, which is to not keep track. You may be giving in this moment, you may be receiving. And it's really hard to tell. And who knows? I may be sitting up here and it may feel like I am the one giving something, but I may actually be the one receiving. And it's not our job to keep track of this. We don't need to do karmic mathematics. We just need to accept as is and dance. It's beautiful. Maybe I'm giving, maybe I'm receiving, but we're all dancing. You know, maybe you're receiving, maybe you're giving. But if we all meet in that space of dancing, then I think it's a very beautiful possibility that we co-create. So this has been a little of my journey. One of the things we talk about is this idea of doing radically generous acts. There's this idea of activism, so there's all these problems in the world, and we say we need to solve them. But it becomes very cumbersome, right? It's me versus you. It's me, my idea versus your idea. But this idea of giftivism, there was no word for it, so we made it up. And so that means we get to define it. This idea of giftivism is what all of these social change giants did. They didn't say me versus you. Gandhi never hated his opponents. In fact, in South Africa, before he came to India, General Schmutz was his opponent. These guys were fighting and fighting and fighting. Gandhi won. And at the end of his victory, General Schmutz, who's the loser, technically speaking, writes to Gandhi and he says, "It was my honor to have you as my antagonist, to have you as my opponent." So imagine telling somebody, doing this Aikido, on one hand you say, "I don't think this is the right action, I will resist that, but I'm going to envelope you in love," right, with the other hand. So what does that look like? And that's this art of giftivism that we talk about. This is a great little story. There's so many stories. I don't know which ones to go into. But this is our common friend Madhu and Meghna. They're filmmakers. They're doing some great work in the world. One time this is a great example of giftivism. So one time he parks his car on the ground, and right as he parks the car, he parks it in a haste. He has to go, and so he parks it in such a way that it takes up 2 parking spots. So his neighbor, who's very upset that he can't fit his car in his spot, somehow gets really angry, takes a big piece of stone and smashes his windshield. So Madhu comes down, he sees that his windshield is smashed, he sees that rock, and his first impulse is, "I'm going to take that rock, smash that guy's windshield." But then he says, "No, I have like really good friends and stuff. They talk about generosity and kindness. I shouldn't. But everything in him saying, smash the window. And he's, oh, no. So there's this whole Mahabharata going on inside him, you know? He's like, what to do. And he's like, okay, just control yourself, just watch your breath, you know. And he puts the stone. Decides to go up. He's on the 3rd floor. This person is on the 4th floor. He decides to go in his house, and then he says, he remembers this idea of giftivism, which is that when you are in this place of top place inside you, you can rebound it with generosity. So he says, how can I be generous in this moment? I know I feel nothing but anger, but how can I be generous? So he decides to grab some sweets. It was Diwali time, and there were some sweets that someone had given. He's like, oh, if I'm truly generous, maybe I'll take these sweets and give it to him. And he thought of the idea as like a good idea, but his body's like, no, you can't do this. You know? And so he goes and takes the box of sweets, like, okay, you gotta do it. So to go from one flight of stairs, it takes him more than 15 minutes, right? He's like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing it. Okay, do it. I can't believe I'm doing it. Okay, just do it, you know? And he's like, debating. He goes up, rings the doorbell. The man of the house is at home. The woman of the house is home. And he says, here, this is for you. And as he describes it, you know, he says, I didn't really feel love or a flow of love or no maitreya, nothing, you know, but I knew it was important for me to do it, you know, to tell myself that generosity and compassion and meanness is more important than meanness. And that was a statement I was making to myself. So he does this. 3 months pass. There's a knock on the door. And it's someone else from their apartment. And this person says, look, someone else, anonymous, has given you this envelope. He opens the envelope. In the envelope is exactly the same amount of money that he needed to fix his windshield. It was that same person who was transformed. It says this guy tried to be kind. Maybe it was his own mental pattern that he changed. So these are very significant things that if we all start to look at conflict in this way, with the extra compassion, with that extra dose of generosity, I think it creates a whole new possibility in that moment and for the future. So how do we create that kind of world? So this idea of giftivism, there are these 4 key shifts that we talk about. The first one is a shift from consumption to contribution. We are taught to be consumers, that our job is just to take. But instead, what if we open every door and we say, my first response is, what can I give? What can I contribute? In this very moment, I can say, maybe I can contribute my stories. Maybe I can contribute my presence. In this moment, you can say, maybe I can contribute my presence. Maybe I can contribute by listening. Or we can all come in and say, okay, well, what's the takeaway? What am I getting from this? How is this going to get me to the next spot? Or I can say, what am I getting from this? How is this going to help me go to the next spot? So if we all come at it with this idea of consumption, then it's not as powerful as if we come with this idea of contribution. So a perfect example of this is smile cards. I wish in the US I would never run out of smile cards, but I have gone to so many places that I'm out of smile cards, but I brought some smile decks for all of you. So smile card says you do a small act of kindness and you leave a smile card behind. And the smile card says that you don't know who did this for you, but keep the chain going. Do something for someone else. Keep the ripple of love flowing. Ideally, we should be in a world where we don't need smile cards, but we've forgotten. And so because we've forgotten, this is a nice reminder. I remember a friend, this girl, I just saw her last Wednesday. I don't know which day of the week we are in right now, but I saw her last Wednesday. And this is she, at the time, she was 19. So someone did a small act of kindness for her and left a smile card behind. So she says, wow, this is really kind. I should do something. And pay it forward. She says, what to do, what to do, what to do. Then she thinks of an idea. She goes to a Starbucks. She lives in Bombay, 19 years old. She goes to a barista. Walks in and tells the person at the counter that I would like to pay for the person who comes after me. And the guy at the counter is like, what's wrong with you? Why do you want to do that? She's like, what do you mean? Like, you should pay for your own self. Why do you want to pay for someone else? She says, well, to make them smile. Imagine if that was you. I just want to make their days. He's like, really? He says, yes. Okay, fine. Well, how are you going to do it anyways? Because you don't know what they're ordering. She says, well, I'll wait on the side. You tell them that someone before them has paid for their order. And give them a smile card and tell them they can pay it forward. And then I'll come back and I'll pay. Okay, fine. So she's on the side. She's waiting. This couple walks in. And she says, okay, they order. And right as they order, this guy, who's himself a little confused about this, says, look, yeah, I don't know why, but someone who came before you has paid for your order. And here's the smile card, and please pay forward the kindness however you want. And this guy is confused about it, but this couple who received, imagine if you went, right? And it would you guys are smiling just listening to the story. Imagine if that actually happened to you. These people are like, wow, like what's going on? They're totally smiling. And as they're smiling, so this guy then says, they start talking, and he says, okay, can you believe it? There are good people. He's like, is this an act of kindness for you, or is it for me, or should we both pay it forward, or what should we do? And they're like, debating, and this 19-year-old is listening to this whole thing. Then they go and sit down on a table, and it turns out, so this 19-year-old pays for it, and it turns out that her table is right next to theirs. So she kind of says, I wonder what they're saying. And they were talking about acts of kindness that they were going to do, even though they hadn't done it. They were all energized. And one of them says, and then I think the wife says, can you believe that there are good people? And it's like, yeah. And can you believe it would happen to us? And it was like, yeah. And that too in Bombay? So this girl, usually we do these small acts of kindness, and we've lost faith in the power of these small acts of kindness. But here was this girl seeing the feedback loop, like seeing actually what happened, accidentally almost, but she got to see and experience. And she was so moved by it, she went out and started a whole kindness drive and has done hundreds and hundreds of acts, inspired hundreds and hundreds of kids to go out and do a lot of these acts. She's like a riot, her parents called me and they were like, what's going on with Bhumi, She's like doing all this stuff, I'm like, yeah, it's great, So this is this idea that once you tap into leading with contribution instead of consumption, it's a point of no return. Because it's like, yeah, the whole world should be like that. So yeah, there's lots of different ways to practice this. And then I've got a smile deck. I think we have enough for everybody, where a lot of people run out of ideas of what to do. So we created a small deck of cards, and it just has a unique idea on each one. So people will shuffle and say, okay, randomly do one. And I'm telling you, you just heard the idea, right? But you take a deck, and you actually pull out a card with this understanding that whatever you get, you have to go out and do. And watch the transformation that happens in that very moment, even before you actually go out and do it. Like, there is something very real about this whole process. And it's supported by nature. It's not the card that does it, it's our own inner nature. So yeah, here's the second shift, which is from transaction to trust. A lot of our world is rooted in transaction. You do this for me, I do this for you. But can we shift it to trust? And what would that world look like? So to experiment with this, we run an experiment called Karma Kitchen. I don't think you've been there, Dr. Nipun, right? You
Sushi lawyers.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, in Bangalore. Yeah. So the idea of Karma Kitchen, it's like a regular restaurant. You walk in, it's run by volunteers, and this is your check. Here in India, it's called Seva Cafe. You walk in, and it's like a regular restaurant. You have a meal, but at the end of the meal, your check says 0. Now, why is it 0? Because someone before you paid for you, although they don't know you. And you get to pay forward whatever you want from people after you. Most people think, wow, you mean you trust people to pay forward? There's no way it can work. Right? Can it? Or will it not? If we assume that people are all selfish, it won't work. But if we say, well, maybe people's greatest potential is not selfishness, but selflessness, it will work. And it does work. It works in so many cities around the world, in the Philippines, in Japan, so many places in India. In Ahmedabad, we run it as Seva Cafe 6 days of the week. Sushil, who is a student of Dr. Newton, runs it in Bangalore. So there are so many examples of this. And this kind of thing, when you walk into a Seva Cafe or Karma Kitchen, it's amazing. People get blown. So many people just get moved to tears before even having the meal. Just understanding. Because what you're asking them to do in that moment is broaden their empathy. You're asking them to connect with the person in front of them and asking them to connect with the person after them, although you're physically not seeing them. And that expansion of consciousness, to hold space for that expansion of consciousness, is incredible. And then all kinds of magic happens in this kind of space. I remember there was a guy who comes in, he's a PhD at UC Berkeley. So we have all kinds of people. People can't believe it, especially business school people. They're like, does this work? I said, look, forget about you hearing an answer, you come and volunteer. So professors will come and volunteer, journalists will come. People want to do stories on this, and we tell them, at least in Berkeley, this was our rule. You can't write about it unless you volunteer. Because there are many things you just have to feel, and then it makes all full sense. If I try to explain it, it doesn't make sense. So a lot of people are now doing research, and there's interesting things that have come out of it. But there was this one PhD student who was very skeptical. He said, you can't work, you can't trust the love in people. It's like so childish, Didn't you go to business school? I'm like, no, I didn't. Thank God. So he walks in, and he's trying to learn and understand. Very sincere guy. And as he's in the space, he's like, he's the waiter, and he's serving a table. And this guy, and a nice connection. In between, he brings out a smile deck. He says, "Sir, pick a card." And the guy picks his kindness idea. He's going to do it. There's a quote underneath the table, and it's just like happiness all around. And so the guy's feeling great. Then he gets the check. It's 0. So before you just pay for you pay forward what you want. This guy does something unusual. He says, calls the waiter, which is this guy who's the first time there, calls him and says, "So the way you trust me to pay forward what I want, right?" He says, "Yes, sir, I think that's the way it works." He says, "Well, here's 100. Here's a $100 note." He says, "I trust you to bring back whatever change you want." He turned the tables on it, right? So, okay, so now this guy who was already like confused about it, now how much change do you take back for this guy, right? Do you say, okay, do I give him nothing or a 20 or what do you do? So he's like, scratching his head, going back and forth. And these intellectual types, they think about everything too much, And he's thinking, but he had a very compassionate heart. And so he's like, what can I do that would radically shift like this whole space between me and him? And so he decides to take out his own wallet, takes out a 20, goes back to this guy, and gives him 120. Can you imagine being that first-time guest in a restaurant? You're already like, wow, you gotta be crazy to run a restaurant like this, and then to like try to understand, to feel it, to feel the love, to feel the happiness, and then like to try to pull this prank on the poor waiter, and then for the waiter to give you 120 back, Like, the guy is just, he's like, what is this, man? Have I come to heaven or what? He just couldn't believe it. He was just so happy, and just seeing the happiness on that guy's face, and just seeing the happiness on this guy's face, and that consciousness which affected all. I was just watching this whole thing. I was also a waiter, and just watching this, I was happy. So this possibility, like when you move from transaction to trust, you create a whole new realm of possibility. The third shift is from isolation to community. Isolation is you just start thinking about me. Right? When you think about me, it gets lonely. You're disconnected. But when you think about the we, this is a shift from me to we. And when you think about the we, you feel held. Even if I go like I feel held in this very moment. I don't know any of them. I know Dr. Newby, I know Sandeep, but outside of that, I don't know anyone else. And I feel held. I don't need to know your name, you don't need to know my name, but we're human beings, and we can belong. And a lot of it is what consciousness we're bringing to that present moment. So this shift from isolation to community is a very important one. Every Wednesday, we were just talking about this inside. Every Wednesday, my parents host these awakening circles where 7 p.m. people come around about this way. And you sit in a circle, or maybe not this way, maybe it's a little less. I don't know. Maybe you can see that. We have a lot of people here, but people just sit in silence for the first hour. In the second hour, there's a circle of sharing. Everyone speaks. And then in the third hour, my mom will feed. Initially, it was 3 of us, and my mom said, "Look, I'll feed whoever comes, because I have to feed you anyways." And I wasn't even married at the time. Little did she know that she would feed more than 40,000 people over the next 15 years. Every single week, she just feeds everyone with full love. And people come and ask her, says, "So, Auntie, thank you so much. This is amazing." And my mom says, "No, thank you." And they're like, "What are you thanking me for? You're the one hosting and doing all the hard work, And my mom's like, "No, thank you for the opportunity to be of service. Because you gave me a chance to be of service, I got a chance to be connected to you. And because I'm connected to you, I'm connected to soul and channels. I'm connected to all life." So to look at every opportunity and say, look, if I take this opportunity to be of service, if you give me a chance to help you, then you're actually inviting me to be in community. I benefit. You also benefit, but we all benefit. But I certainly benefit. And so my mom will say, "No, thank you for the opportunity to be of service." And initially people don't understand. You know, some of my friends would always joke with her and they would say, "Oh, no, Auntie, if you want, I'll give you that opportunity on Thursday night too. You know, your cooking is great." And over time, they do, sure enough, they see it. And they will come and ask, you know, some like very intellectual types will come. I'm really picking on intellectual types today. I don't know why. Must be the vibration in the room. And she says, you know, they say, "So what's your plan?" Right? Like, what's the strategy? So many people are, "We could do so much, you know. Like, what's your strategy? What's your business plan?" And my parents would say, "Look, we don't have a plan. All we want to do, if you benefit from this space, and you leave that door with a little bit of extra gratitude, with a little bit of extra oomph in your step, that has to flow out somewhere in the world. And wherever it flows out in the world, that is our family too. The whole world is our family. So it's okay. Where are you going to take it? Where are you going to keep? There's no bank account for gratitude. This is mine. I'm going to keep it here. You know, it has to go somewhere, and wherever it goes, we're family with that." And so she says, "Look, our business plan is this. Our strategy is this. We want to confuse you with gratitude. That's it. And let nature do the rest." And incredible things happen in that space. And I can say, forget about all the external things that happen. I can say that as a son, I have seen my parents, you know, go through 15 years. I mean, this is like solid. And my mom, and even until recently, even my dad, they're, you know, middle-class people, and they have full-time jobs. I mean, it's not easy to just cook for, you know, for 65 people every single week. And there's no tiring. Like, you have to every single week. But over time, at some point, you start to hit a tipping point, and the gratitude just overtakes. You know? And I have no doubt that if my mom were to die on a Thursday, she would probably host a Wednesday on, you know, the day before. There's no exit strategy. You know, it's not like, I want to do this and then done, I'll pass it on. It's like, no, just let it flow. Like, it's practice. It becomes a way of being. And it becomes a way of being in community. I have seen patients belong. So many people, anything in our house, most things are gifted. You know, like on random days, people will ring the doorbell and there'll be a whole bag of potatoes, you know, or there'll be a whole bag of like some vegetables. Or sometimes we open our bathroom and there's a whole gallon of soap, you know, for people to use. It's just so many people like offering their kindness in so many different ways. You know, the whole space becomes that. And then over time it dawns upon you that actually even all your body parts are all kindness. These are all, we're just integrated at the moment, but really these are all disintegrated. Like when we die, we're all going to be disintegrated into all things of the world. You know, like we're going to be ashes, and it's going to go out, and then we may form again into some aggregate form, and that's so beautiful. So to be in tune with that, I think is very critical. So that's this whole shift. And there are so many Wednesday stories which I'll skip, but that's the shoe rack outside our home. And the last shift is a shift from scarcity to abundance. Scarcity says we don't have enough. Abundance says there's enough for everyone. There's not enough for everyone's greed, as Gandhi used to say, but there's enough for everyone's need. And abundance is really holding that mindset. If you feel, I don't know if you, when I used to take these tests, you know, back in school, it feels so long ago. But sometimes you're like, you have 5 minutes left of the exam, and you have a whole lot of questions left, and you're like, oh my God, I have so many. And you're like, stop thinking about so many, at least do one that you can do, you know, but you're just thinking so many, and then you can't do anything. And that's this scarcity mindset that so many times in life we're so obsessed with like, oh my God, how am I going to make money, how am I going to survive? It's not that big a deal. We didn't have a 5-year plan in our mother's womb, you know. And we're here, we're doing fine. You know? So a lot of it is going to happen. We just need to stop obsessing about it. I mean, there's so many ways to look at this, but I think for me, I just look at it and say, look, I don't obsess and say, oh my God, tomorrow I have to brush my teeth. No, it just happens. Right? It's like, yeah, I do have to do it. I do have to take a shower like that. You do have to take care of your material existence. But you don't need to obsess about it because that's not the sole purpose. It's not just to survive and sustain the body. purpose is to purify the mind and fall into this connectedness. So this idea of shifting from scarcity to abundance is very key. This is a nice example of my friend Pancho, who lives in a part of the world where, this is in Oakland, where in his neighborhood there are more liquor stores than grocery stores. It's extremely dangerous, and it's, in many ways, a very uncomfortable place to stay. So he goes into this community. Usually people say, look, you guys don't have enough. What you need is help from us people who have. And usually when we do that, we create this top-down, hierarchy. And that's no fun for the people. Giving is not meritorious at all. If you're given that way, no, that can't be called giving. Right? It's just material giving. There's no spiritual merit in that. And on the receiving end, it feels no good. And who wants to be a hierarchy? Yeah, please give me. That doesn't feel good either. So Pancho, in that community, he decides, he says, well, what can we give? But this is where people are routinely, he has experienced people just opening fire. Right? People, it's just a very bad part of town. And mostly you would just say, these people don't have anything to give. They don't have any, they have so many problems they can't give anything. Pancho says, we can give in every situation. We just have to look hard enough. So he realizes that he lives on this street called Fruitvale. It's called Fruitvale because it has a lot of fruit. So he says, well, all these people have so many problems that although nature is giving them all this abundance of fruits, mostly it's just like falling down. So he says, I'm going to get a bunch of volunteers, and I'm going to say, sir, can I come to your house and pluck your oranges? Can I come to your house and pluck your apples? And then he creates this fruit stand. And on the fruit stand, he says, this is local, organic, fresh produce offered as a gift from your neighbors to you. All of a sudden, everyone in that community who says, oh, we need to receive, we need to get, we have so many problems, they're like, oh, it's like a breath of fresh air, right? You're like, oh, that's nice. Well, thank you for doing that. And it's like, oh, you are actually my neighbor. I've seen you around. We start having a conversation, a very different kind of conversation. And it starts to really create a different kind of synergy in that whole community. And it starts with the idea of saying, they call it fruta gift, is what they call it. So gift fruit, and they speak Spanish there. And so these are all fruits, and they don't have a price tag. They're not selling. Their purpose is not to sell. Their purpose is to connect. And connect with what? With fruits, and fruits that nature was already given. So in every situation, if we can start to say, not that we don't have enough, what do we have enough of? What are our gifts? What can I give to the world here and now? And maybe I don't have enough gifts by myself, but if I combine mine with yours, with yours, with yours, maybe more of us have something that can be meaningful to that fifth person. And then we can all be good neighbors, and a whole different world can emerge. So those are the four gifts, four shifts: consumption to contribution, transaction to trust, isolation to community, and scarcity to abundance. And this is the organization called ServiceSpace. We used to be called Charity Focus. I think people might know it when it was okay. And then we realized that we don't do much charity work, and we're not really focused either. So then we said ServiceSpace is a much better name. So we hold space for these values of service. And you can hold space in three major ways. One is inside you. Very critical. When you do a smile card act, it transforms you. That's internal space. Then there's space on the outside. Right? This is a girl named Vinya, who's actually, like, a whole bunch of them go to a street and they just hold up signs that says smile. And maybe on one intersection you meet a couple of people and you're like, no, I'm not going to smile with you. I'm going to keep going. The world is a scary place, And the next intersection you have like three more people. And you're like, okay, why are they taking over the city? You don't know, okay, I'm not looking, but you're kind of looking and you're kind of like smiling. And then the third intersection, you have four more people. And then pretty soon, by like the 5th and 6th intersection, you can't help but smile. You know, you're like, okay, yeah, fine, I can smile, no matter what I have going on. So you hold space on the outside. Like our kitchen is holding space on the outside. So there's inner space that you hold, and then there's outer space that you hold. And then there's virtual space, online space, where you have, and online is not good for very deep ties, but it's very good for loose ties. So, and that has its value too. Of course, if we just do online, it's no good, and I'll be the first person to criticize that. But there's a lot online. So we run a portal called Daily Good. It shares a little bit of good news. It's called dailygood.org. It shares a little bit of good news every single day. We all need good news. You know, if we don't see the good, if we just read, I don't know, Times of India, we're going to think the world is a scary place. Everyone is out to get us. Everyone is mean. Everyone is like stealing. Everyone is robbing people. Everyone is, you know, doing all kinds of sad things. And while that is true, and we don't need to deny that, but there's also a lot of good that just isn't get reported. So how do we bring that good about? And there's a lot of online portals. Like we have this portal called KarmaTube. It's inspiring videos. So how do we have, just as you have YouTube, why not KarmaTube? So there's KarmaTube, you know, and so there's a whole string of these online spaces. We do whole space, inside, outside, and online. And that's the essence of our work. And it's a whole ecosystem. But this is really the question, is that what happens if we start with the assumption that people want to be selfless? Not that people are greedy and selfish. What if we approach everything, anytime we're holding space, whether it is in one conversation, whether it is that conversation with the rickshaw. By the way, there's a rickshaw driver in Kondaveti. He runs his rickshaw on a gift economy basis. He says, no meters in my rickshaw. I trust you to pay forward for the person after you. And people say, wow, you're a rickshaw driver, hand to mouth. And he says, yeah. They said, does it work out? And he says, here's a notebook. He shows them, point A to point B. This is how much someone gave. Point B, point C to point D, this is how much they gave. Some give more, some give less. On average, it works out. Then he shows them the second notebook. So take a look at this. This is where I asked them how they felt sitting in my rickshaw. And what is the value of that? Priceless. So that kind of priceless is key, and that we can only create that kind of priceless value when we assume that people want to be selfless, people want to be loving, people want to create these four shifts that we talk about. So this is probably a question I would leave you with. Last thing, I think a lot of this happens, so out of the three spaces, inner, outer, and online, the most powerful is inner. And a lot of the inner manifests as personal practices, right? What are you doing? So one of my friends after the Delhi, in fact, Madhu, whose story I shared, he was very disturbed by the Delhi gang rape. And he says, we got to do something. He says, how can I bring out the positive things people are doing? And so in very much the spirit of Maitreya, or in the spirit of, you know, that everyone has something good, he went out and says, what is one thing you do? What is one thing you do to be the change? What is one thing? You may not be doing it your whole life. You know, like Gandhiji saying, my life is my message. Maybe all our lives are not fully our messages yet. But there must be that one thing you do to align yourself. And he asked everyone that one thing. And some guy, like this guy Dennis, says, I travel by cycle. Yes, I'm the change, not polluting the environment. This is Madhvi. She says, I sit with an elderly person every night to listen to their stories. Yes, I am the change. This is Pancho, meditating and saying, you know, they put him in jail because there was this protest, and he says there was a lot of violence. He says, I'm going to meditate. And so this is Pancho and Elijah. This photo went real viral. And they arrested him, took him to jail for meditating. And his offense read, disturbing peace. And he says, yes, I am the change. Go ahead. If you want to put me in jail for meditating and call it disturbing peace, no problem. You know? This is my friend's daughter. She says, I brought happy tears onto a homeless man's face simply by smiling. Yes, I am the change. we all have these small things that we can do, and I think it's really important that we do that. And I think a lot of them start with small acts. I wish I had smile cards. I do have smile decks for a bunch of you. Maybe we'll leave it outside before you go. And each like card of the deck has a unique idea. And you pick a random idea, go out and do it. And it's small.